Now we move on. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on with Joe Biden and the Democrats. So we discussed the other day the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. It passed the House, it passed the Senate first. And then the question was, hey, is it going to pass the House? And I was a little skeptical on that front because you have Josh Gottheimer, who's a massively corrupt corporate Democrat who's beholden to Big Pharma and Wall Street. And he has a group that they call the Unbreakable Nine. And if 3 of those so-called Unbreakable Nine wanted to strike down this legislation, they could have done it. Now, they didn't do it. It turns out they didn't want to be the donkey of the day in the spotlight of the media, where the media says, hey, you're blocking this, historic legislation that even Manchin and Sinema have now agreed to. So it ended up passing the House. And then it goes to Biden's desk. So Biden just did the official signing of it yesterday. And there was a lot of media coverage. He gave Joe Manchin the pen that he used to sign it. Supposed to be like, a sign of solidarity with Joe Manchin. My recommendation to Biden would have been to hand Joe Manchin a giant bag of dicks, because Joe Manchin is the reason that this bill doesn't have universal pre-K. Joe Manchin is the reason this bill doesn't have elder care. Joe Manchin is the reason this bill doesn't have free college. Joe Manchin is the reason this doesn't have an extended child tax credit. Joe Manchin is the reason that this doesn't have a Medicare expansion. So, I could sit here and go on and on. The provisions of the original Build Back Better were the biggest transformation of our economy since FDR and the New Deal. And he took hatchet to it. So did Kyrsten Sinema. So, look, yes, we got something here. And Biden's being nice and giving him the pen. But we need to keep things in perspective as to where we really are and how much further we have to go. But anyway, after Biden signs the legislation, he then gives a speech about the Inflation Reduction Act. And this is uncharacteristic for Biden. Now, we all know Biden as the guy who, I like to reach across the aisle. I like to be bipartisan. I like to, even after getting my eye spit in by somebody like Mitch McConnell, I say positive things about him in speeches. Well, it appears like old Joe is a wee bit fed up. He's a wee bit fed up because when you've been negotiating in good faith for an extended period of time and they have not, well, the human response after a while is to sort of get your guard up and say, you know what, screw you. So listen to his comments here and forgive the audio a little bit. I think there's a little bit of static in the background. There's nothing I could really do about that. But anyway, here we go.
Inflation Reduction Act does so many things that for so many years, so many of us have fought to make happen. And let's be clear. In this historic moment, Democrats sided with the American people, and every single Republican in the Congress sided with the special interest in this vote. Every single one.
That's already stronger than anything I've ever heard out of Joe Biden. Remember, he's the guy who said, hey, after Trump is out of office, the Republican fever will break and they'll be more reasonable and they'll be willing to work with us. And now he's out there saying every single one of them sided with the special interests. Every single one of them sided against the American people.
In fact, the big drug companies spent nearly $100 million to defeat this bill. $100 million. And remember, every single Republican in Congress voted against this bill.
He's flat out saying they're corrupt. They're corrupt. Big Pharma spent $100 million to try to kill this thing, and they held Big Pharma's hands and gave them a massage. They agree with Big Pharma. They're not with the American people. Again, this is more aggressive than I've ever seen from him.
Every single Republican in Congress voted against lowering prescription drug prices, against lowering health care costs, against the fair tax system. Every single Republican, every single one, voted against tackling the climate crisis, against lowering our energy costs, against creating good-paying jobs. My fellow Americans, that's the choice we face. We can protect the already powerful or show the courage to build a future where everybody has an even shot. That's the America I believe in. That's what I believe in. And today, And today, we've come a step closer to making that America real. Today, too often, we confuse noise with substance. Too often, we confuse setbacks with defeat. Too often, we hand the biggest microphones to the critics and the cynics who delight in declaring failure, while those committed to making real progress do the hard work of governing. Making progress in this country is as big and complicated as ours clearly is not easy. It's never been easy. But with unwavering conviction, commitment, and patience, progress does come. Your dad was right. And when it does, like today, people's lives are made better, and the future becomes brighter, and a nation can be transformed. That's what's happening now.
All right, so there you go. Look, the tone that he's using against the Republican politicians is not something I've ever heard from him before, and it's something that I definitely support. My only area of disagreement is I'm really averse to the way in which Democratic politicians and the media is portraying what happened with this bill. Because look, the fact of the matter is they're saying, oh my God, it's so historic, it's so amazing, it's so unbelievable. The fact of the matter is Democrats did the bare minimum here. Now, when I say they did the bare minimum, that does mean the bare minimum. In other words, it's better than absolutely nothing at all, right? And I'm going to get to the provisions of the bill in a second, and you can make up your own mind about that. But it's not to take away credit from what this is, but it needs to be in context and in perspective that ultimately we're talking about a fraction of what the original debate was around. When we were talking about $3.5 trillion in spending, and now we're down to, what is it, $775 billion? So I just want people to react to this appropriately, which is to say, congrats, you did the bare minimum. Now, in today's political climate, even doing the bare minimum, the Democrats are going to get rewarded for this, and in fact already have been rewarded from it, according to, all the polls that are coming out recently, because they used to be down 6 to 8 points to Republicans in the midterms. Now they're dead tied or even slightly ahead. Biden's approval rating used to be 33%. Now it's bumped all the way up to 40%. And I suspect it'll go up a little more, maybe 42 or 44%, something along those lines. Because there has been, a whole bunch of legislative victories, even though they're weak and milquetoast and, we could criticize them until the cows come home. The fact of the matter is we got the PACT Act, which is healthcare for veterans who were exposed to toxic burn pits. We got the CHIPS Act, which is an attempt to bring back microchip manufacturing in the U.S. for national security reasons, because microchips are made mostly in Taiwan now. And with the pandemic and the supply chain issues, we realize, hey, we can't outsource everything. We sort of need this industry here. That's another thing that they did. They did get a gun reform bill through, which, again, was as weak as humanly possible, but they did get something through. And then you mix in the Roe versus Wade thing, you mix in January 6th, and you mix in now the IRA, you're going to see a bump in the polls for Democrats. But everybody just needs to keep in mind, this was absolutely the bare minimum. There's no way around that. But having said that, it shows that the Republicans are even against the bare minimum. So this bill specifically, and we've gone over this before, but for anybody who hasn't seen those segments or listened to them, I want to give them the details so they can make up their own mind on this stuff. But in the Inflation Reduction Act, we have clean electricity tax credits, $161 billion worth. Then we have money for air pollution, hazardous materials, transportation, and infrastructure. So in other words, help to clean up the air pollution and hazardous materials and build up some new infrastructure. That's $40 billion. Individual clean energy incentives, $37 billion. Clean manufacturing tax credits to incentivize clean manufacturing, $37 billion. Clean fuel and vehicle tax credits. So that's the thing that people are talking about. I don't know the exact number, $6,000 or $7,000 a pop if you buy certain electric vehicles. That is $36 billion goes towards that. Conservation, rural development, and forestry, $35 billion. Then you got building efficiency, $27 billion. Other energy and climate spending, $14 billion. Now here is one of the most important provisions in my opinion, because this is where you'll see like the most impact. Extension of expanded ACA subsidies. So what that means in layman's terms is you have more funding for Obamacare, so more money going towards people's health care. That's $64 billion towards that. Now, again, I think it's important to clarify, Biden used to talk about a public option all the time on the campaign trail. And then he got in office and he hasn't talked about it at all. Why? Because he's paid by the for-profit health insurance companies. So in some ways, this is a massive betrayal. But again, $64 billion towards healthcare is also, let's not kid ourselves, $64 billion more than any Republican would do. And really, the conversation we should be having is, let's get Medicare for all, right? But anyway, $64 billion towards expanded Obamacare. Then we have a repeal of the Trump-era drug rebate rule, $122 billion, a drug price inflation cap, $101 billion, and then you have negotiation of certain drug prices. $99 billion goes towards that. Now, of course, the problem with this provision is that it's only certain drugs. It's not all of them. And I think it kicks in a few years in the future. So, in other words, Big Pharma got their greedy little paws on it and watered it down to the high heavens. But the bare minimum we were able to get through was, we'll negotiate for some drugs and we'll do it in the future. And then, in my opinion, flat out, the best provision is the 15% corporate minimum tax. Because you guys know, we've covered the stories on this show, some corporations pay 0% in taxes. Zero. Some corporations have what's called a negative income tax rate, which is they actually get welfare from the government, from taxpayers. They get a net subsidy at the end of the year. I think Honeywell was one of them. Of course, they're a defense contractor. There's been a number of them. Again, we've covered it. So that's now going gonzo. That's a phenomenal provision. But again, it's still a shadow of what we could have and should have gotten with Build Back Better. And then, of course, you have the increase in IRS enforcement. Now, Republicans are spinning this like Democrats are going to go after the working class. The fact of the matter is, in the bill, there is a provision that talks about how nobody under $400,000 gets their taxes raised. So the beefing back up of the IRS really in many ways is just to sort of fix it from how Trump destroyed it, but also it's to make sure you can target corporations and wealthy people. And then you have the closure of the carried interest loophole. I don't think made it into the final bill. They tweaked that. There's a big loophole in that. But what did make it into the final bill is a 1% tax on stock buybacks. Now, stock buybacks should be totally illegal. They should be banned. Ronald Reagan legalized them in 1982. It's just a scam for corporations to, boost their own stock price up. So it should be banned. But insofar as it's going to exist, yeah, tax the shit out of it for sure. So anyway, that's the legislation, or as I call it again, the bare minimum. But the fact of the matter is, Republicans were even against the bare minimum, and Joe Biden, for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, went on the offense. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal, Kyle, and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.